So week 6 in the books, sort of, until our Monday night game. We'll have a pick for that a little bit later, but it feels a bit like a WTF week in general. Now, the NFL will do this every now and then, reminds us what it is capable of doing, even with the best team. So let's run through it. The Bills win on Sunday Night Football against the Giants. They're down 6-0, shut out through 3 quarters after the Jags loss in London, where they scored 7 points through the first 3 quarters. So you're like, all right, you're going to be kidding me with this. Credit the Giants defense for hanging in there. But on the other side of it, it's Tyrod Taylor. It's not Daniel Jones. The offensive line is a mess. Both tackles are gone. They lose the backup third tackle. And then Justin Pugh, who's introduced, is off the couch, which I will get to later on. Then he swings out the left tackle. He didn't even look like he was filling out his uniform. I mean, granted, I know he's a very big guy, but he wasn't playing football, and he goes from left guard to left tackle in the same game. So it's not like the Giants were doing anything. I think there's a little bit of a like, hey, Brian Daboll and this offense, they're doing some good things. They weren't asking Taylor to do too much. Like, dude, they scored 6 points. The Bills scored 0 through 3 quarters. We know the defensive injuries that they've had that we've covered already, but I'm starting to think the Miami win for Buffalo was worse for Buffalo than it was for Miami. Because since that game, and some of it's injuries, but it's almost like Buffalo's like, all right, we've got this. This is our division. And granted, I think they're still a really good football team, and I think Josh Allen is really good. But Miami said the right things after that game where they were admitting, yeah, we probably needed a bit of a wake-up call here. So I don't know if that game means something or if it means that Buffalo started feeling themselves too much and Miami needed some sort of confidence reset. I thought Allen was bad last night. Even the second touchdown, I can't believe he made that throw. I thought there were 3 or 4 throws. I was like, what is he doing? He's like completely parallel to the line of scrimmage. And then he's just throwing it. And we know, like on this podcast, I say all the time, like, stop worrying about perfect mechanics. There's very few throws that are perfectly set up, great foundation, all the things that you would want. But sometimes these guys get into these bad habits, and like Allen feels like he's in a run. Now, I also think, this isn't really making excuses, I think it's true. When he got hit and he went backwards and they buzzed to go check him for concussion protocol stuff, he had actually been hurt earlier in the game. He went down and he immediately grabs his throwing shoulder. Okay. He immediately goes for it. And I don't know, like last year when we talked about the interceptions, it's like, okay, well, clearly this elbow thing's the big difference, but I think it's all part of it. And I'm really surprised to see them play this poorly. I know they got the win. Diggs had 16 targets. Everyone else combined had 12 targets. They're missing one of their tight ends again, who I was really excited about, but a weird win for another Super Bowl contender, but at least they won. Like I said, I think I feel better about Miami now, even after that head-to-head matchup. Miami, who's down 14-0 to Carolina, then scores 35 straight points. You want to talk about a score where you're like, wait, is this going to happen? Is this going to add to all the absurdity of this weekend? Not the case. Mostert now has, 11 touchdowns in 6 games. Achane didn't even play in this one. And also, I need to correct this Carolina mistake that I've made now. Whenever looking at the top quarterbacks in the draft and then going like, would a team now, because Carolina's 0-6, would they ever do it? They don't have their pick. It was part of the trade, so you don't have to worry about that. I have made that mistake, so I just want to make sure I clear that one up on Bryce Young potentially being replaced by a draft pick, at least not the number 1 pick or wherever it ends up landing. So Philly loses. So as much as you're worried about the Bills, because that was ugly, it just was. I mean, cool, you won, but what's going on? You have Philly who loses to the Jets. Hurts was terrible. He had 3 picks. The third one, I couldn't believe he threw. 2 defensive backs are basically bookending the receiver. They're all at the same depth. So, if you're expecting your guy's going to be able to make a play on the ball before the defenders are, not really the case. I mean, in considering game, situation, score, all that kind of stuff, like that was rookie stuff. Like again, some of the best quarterbacks still make mistakes, but that one for Hurts on another bad day where depending on which game you're looking at this season, this game or the New England game, 2 of the worst games that Hurts has had in a while. Explosive plays are just down for this team. For whatever reason, They have the personnel for it, but explosive plays are like less than half of what they used to be in the passing game. Hasn't mattered. We've talked about their rushing attack, that they can go to that when the passing isn't working. Well, not against this Jets defense. Like, it's funny, but this Jets defense is that good. That's why the whole Aaron Rodgers thing is so absurd, because Zach Wilson, if you want to go through like some of the playing the result stuff that we do with quarterbacks far too often, Wilson's, I would say, had one game where you wouldn't want to bench him the next week. The Denver game. Or no, I should get the Kansas City game. The Kansas City game. Look, if you dig through all the numbers on those other games, the fact that they're even competitive in any of these speaks to how absurd this defense is, how great the linemen. I mean, every single level has something where you're like, oh, it's a D-line game. Oh, it's their linebackers all over the place. I feel like their linebackers are involved in everything the entire game anyway. But this is turning a bit into like, oh, well, Zach Wilson isn't that bad. It's like, yeah, I actually still think he is that bad. Most of the games aren't that good. On the other side, for Philly, you lose Lane Johnson. 3 guys from the secondary actually left the game. So we're starting to get to that point. You know, we saw it with Buffalo. We saw it with San Francisco. We're going to get to there in a little bit here on some of the injury totals and some of the stuff that starts adding up here. And Hurts, by the way, 7 picks this year. Jalen Hurts had 7. He had 6 all of last season. All right. San Francisco loses to Cleveland. Cleveland is now allowing – we're definitely not making – I think this will be the week where people start realizing how absurd this defense is. Cleveland is allowing 200.4 yards per game. Okay? The last time we saw a team do this – now, granted, they got to do it for the whole season to keep up with what's happening here historically. We're talking like 50 years ago, over 50 years ago. The Vikings in 1969 they allowed an average of 194 yards per game. In 1970, it was 200 yards a game. So we're talking in this version of the NFL, Cleveland is doing something that we haven't seen since 1969 and 1970 with one of the great historic defenses of all time in Minnesota. So we know that they've been really good. Going back to week 1 against Cincinnati, we're like, are they really good? Is Jim Schwartz really that good? Was it just the weather? Like, what's going on? That was a sign. And by the way, Cleveland has lost every turnover battle of every game they've been in so far this year. And that's also, as you probably knew this, without Deshaun Watson even playing in the game. Now, on the other side for San Francisco, some really good numbers when you look at what's happened with McCaffrey, pre-McCaffrey, now with McCaffrey, and then without him. So he goes out. Trent Williams goes out at left tackle. He actually came back in. Debo went out. So before McCaffrey was on San Francisco, they were 19th in expected points added, right, offensively. So they get McCaffrey in and they're first. Now, my issue with the McCaffrey trade wasn't that he wasn't awesome. I was just like, he's just going to get hurt again. And I thought, it's just right around the corner with him. And he had. And he's a perfect fit for all the different things that San Francisco would want to do. You look at him certain nights, you're like, oh, it's because he's doing this in the passing game. It means the other team has to play man coverage a lot more, and Purdy's actually better against man, but it's because he has McCaffrey, because they don't want to just let McCaffrey do whatever he wants. Well, you take all of those pieces away. Now, all of a sudden, Cleveland's playing a different kind of man, and Purdy looks like the guy that was the last pick in the draft. And there's a very weird thing that happens, and it happened with Josh Allen. And he turned into a really good quarterback. It was somehow like it wasn't good enough for a fan base to just have a quarterback who's really good. It has to be that everybody was also wrong about their quarterback. To this day, I'll never understand the Josh Allen thing of like, they came up with some petition where they were like, we want you to repent for not thinking he was the man his first couple of years. And I didn't think he was the man because he didn't play like it. He turned into a better quarterback later on. That's okay. But somehow that's not good enough. And it was happening with Purdy too, where it's like, oh, everybody's only saying this about Purdy because of this, this, and this. We're like, well, I don't know. Like, teams passed on him for 7 rounds. There had to be some reason that happened. I think we all agree that Shanahan is the guy that figures this all out. So you take away some of those pieces like you do for anybody else. Like, the really special quarterbacks are the guys that find a way, even when you take away all their toys. And Purdy may eventually become one of those guys that would still feel like a reach. But we saw yesterday, finally, look, he'd been really clean for a long time, hadn't thrown an interception, hadn't lost a game. So you can't just sit here and be like, oh, I told you he wasn't that good. But we saw for an afternoon, he really struggled against a really good defense there. So I know it sounds like I'm knocking him a bit. I guess I'm just surprised at all the you get a good quarterback in Purdy. It seems like he can be your guy, but you also want everyone to admit that they were wrong for something that every team in the NFL did by passing on him numerous times. Best win, worst loss. I'm going to go with the Lions against Tampa Bay. Tampa had been 3-1. You're looking at teams that are leading their division. You know, with Tampa, you're like, could they actually be a sneaky division winner? And it feels that way with some of the Saints stuff that's going on. Goff goes for 340 yards. Jameson Williams back in the end zone, who doesn't have a lot of catches in his career for the weird start that he's had to it, whether it's the injury or the suspension. But just seeing him out there and remembering just how special he was at Bama, there's no reason why he doesn't become a big-time weapon for them, even if it looks a little like it's just not smooth as of right now. Even the touchdown was kind of a weird deal. But anyway, he's going to be able to take the top off of defense a lot, depending on how he wants to play, and it just adds something else to them. They go 9-16 on third down, 2 of 12 for Baker. Look, Tampa's one-dimensional again. We knew the story from last year, but at least with Detroit, you start looking at them at the NFC overall in their conference, both at 5-1 after this weekend with Philadelphia and San Francisco losing. Worst loss, I think it's the Saints. I'm going to stay in this division. They lose 20-13 to Houston. And it's not because it's the Texans. The Texans are a viable opponent. We've watched them throughout this year. They are in games. I mean, D'Amico might be coach of the year. At least that's the way it feels a third into the season. But for the Saints to go from what I thought could be the best team in the NFC South to maybe the third best team after Houston and Tampa and losing to both of them in 2 of the last 3 weeks, and it feeling significant, feeling like this offense can't do enough to go with what I thought would be a really good defense. I'm now worried about the Saints, a team that I was much higher on before the season started. I guess the other worst loss could be Philly against the Jets, which is totally fine too, but we've already covered it on that one, and we all respect the Jets defense that much more. All right, numbers you should know. Hurts has been pressured now in that game. He was pressured on 21 of 50 dropbacks. He is 3-7 in 10 starts where he's pressured on over 40% of his dropbacks. Philadelphia also has the number 2 toughest remaining schedule. Think about this. They've got Miami, then they've got Washington, they've got Dallas, Kansas City, the Bills, the Niners, and Dallas again. So that's 6 to 7 games of the Washington matchup there against the Commanders lumped in between. Cincinnati has the toughest remaining schedule as of right now, but Philadelphia, that is brutal at number 2. How about this one? Miami now, weeks 1 through 6, is averaging 37 points per game. That's the 5th highest since 2000. So I was like, wait, this actually feels a little low. Do you remember the Denver Peyton Manning team that actually got smoked in the Super Bowl against the Seahawks? They started their 2013 season, weeks 1 through 6, averaging over 44 points per game. So they were a touchdown better than what Miami is doing now, and that was 10 years ago. As the season played out, that number did dip from the first 6 weeks to what their ultimate number was, where they averaged just under 38 points per game. And again, smoked in the playoffs. Final thought. Recapping all the weekend introductions, I kind of like the introductions. But even as somebody who definitely isn't an Ohio State fan, I just think it's wrong for anyone to do the also different university. I don't understand why anybody does it. I don't understand. The SUNY Purchase. No. There's one. The Ohio State guys got to it. Maybe there's some Reddit thread about somebody actually did it from Kentucky and nobody paid attention, and then the Ohio State guys did it. I just don't like it. I don't like it when the other guys try to do it. The high school thing, who knows what somebody went through in college, No issue with that one. When you make up something, though, that's way out there, like Terrell Suggs used to have a field day with this thing, but at least he was really good and also kind of scary. So I felt like, you know what? Let him have it. If you're really good and you're going to get creative with the intro, that's okay. When you're a nickel that just got brought in from the practice squad, let's just keep it between the lines here. Tell us where you went to school. Keep it moving. No dramatic pauses whatsoever. Justin Pugh, who played offensive line for the Giants last night, he said right off the couch, that one I'm okay with. At first I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh, that's right. He just got signed He hadn't been playing, and now he's out there running around like a crazy person. And when he moved to tackle, I don't think he was having as much fun as when he was playing guard. So just something to think about if you're listening to this right now and you're an NFL player and you didn't go to the Ohio State University. It just sounds weird when you do it with the other school.